Got her! It's a
Deadalus was a polymath. And what is a polymath? Well, I'm glad you asked. A polymath is somebody who is really good at doing a lot of different things, and not just math things. It's sort of a genius times 10. One of the earliest known polymaths was a guy named Leonardo da Vinci. You've probably heard of him. He lived about 500 years ago in Italy. Now, Da Vinci was a great artist. He painted the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but he also designed the first armored tank. And he invented the very first parachute. But long before Leonardo da Vinci, according to Greek mythology, there was another polymath, just as great as Da Vinci, and his name was Deadalus. Now, Deadalus was an architect, a builder, a fashion designer, an aeronautical engineer, and, well, more things than I can list. But the thing about polymaths and geniuses is that their brains are so full of creativity and innovation that there's not much room left for common sense and caution, and that can lead to a lot of trouble. Now, when Deadalus was a young man, he was hired by the city of Athens to build a temple to honor the gods of Mount Olympus. Deadalus got a great idea. He decided that he would put a glass roof on that temple. And that way, when the people came to bring their sacrifices to the gods, they could look up through that glass roof, which had magnification qualities, and they could see the faces of the Olympian gods. And they would know if the gods were pleased or displeased with their offerings. And if the gods weren't happy, they could quickly change them. Well, when the gods heard about this, they were not pleased at Daedalus' plan. So the next day, Deadalus was on the roof of that new temple. He was installing the glass tiles. His assistant was near him, also working, and a great storm came into Athens. There was thunder and lightning and rain, and the wind was blowing fiercely. Well, Deadalus, if he had had any common sense, should have gotten down off that roof and taken his young assistant with him. But he didn't. He kept working, and he told his assistant to keep working. And suddenly a gust of wind picked up that young assistant and threw him to the ground, broke his neck. And that young assistant was Daedalus' nephew. Well, Daedalus was very sad about the loss of this dear nephew. The people of Athens were angry. They thought that this tragedy was an omen from the gods. And so they kicked Daedalus out of town. And they tore down that temple. Daedalus was homeless for a while. He wandered around, and finally he found a welcome mat in a place called Crete. Now, the king of Crete, whose name was Minos, heard about Daedalus' great skills, and so he hired him to be the royal handyman. Now, to tell you the truth, the royals on the island of Crete were not exactly famous for their family values. The truth is, they were a bunch of freelance Fruit Loops who put the fun back in dysfunctional. The queen, Queen Pasiphae, she had a son. He was a difficult child, a problem child, you might say. He was always angry. He was belligerent. He never did as he was asked. He was a bully, an actual bully. You see, he was a minotaur, half human, half bull. Now the king, King Midas, he hated this child. He despised him. He would sometimes try to lock this minotaur boy in his room, but the minotaur would just chew the locks off the door and get himself out. So when Deadalus came and began to work for the king and queen, King Minos said to Deadalus that he wanted him to build a special apartment, a little house, so that the Minotaur boy would have his own place to live. He wanted something that was secure with only one entrance and no exits. And so Deadalus designed something called a labyrinth. It was a maze, an underground maze of tunnels that twisted back and forth like a pit full of snakes. There was one entrance and no exits. And that is where the Minotaur boy was put. And he never saw the light of day again. And he never saw other people again, except for one day out of every 9 years. And on that very special day, once every 9 years, 14 young people, adolescents, would be sent down into that maze, and there they would be eaten by the Minotaur. Well, the people on the island of Crete began to call this special feast day the Day of the Dead. Well, on one of those feast days, a ship arrived at the island of Crete. It docked in this beautiful, ultra-modern harbor that Deadalus had designed, and the 14 young people came ashore. They were a gift from the people of Athens, because, you see, some years back, Athens and the island of Crete had gotten into a battle, and Athens had lost. And so now, every 9 years, they had to make a reparation payment to the people of Crete. And this particular year, the reparation payment were those 14 young people. Well, they came ashore. They were led by a brash young man named Theseus. Now, to tell you the truth, Theseus wasn't the sharpest quill on the porcupine, but he had the guts to do what needed to be done. He led those 13 other young people up to the entrance of that labyrinth. He marched right inside, trailing and unraveling a string behind him so that he could find his way back out again. He killed the Minotaur, and he managed to get out of the labyrinth and lead those other young people back to the ship, and they sailed away from Crete, taking with them the daughter of King Minos and Queen Pasiphae, whose name was Ariadne. Well, when the king and the queen heard about this, they were livid. Somebody was going to have to pay. Now, to tell you the truth, King Minos was actually glad to be rid of the Minotaur, but for them to have lost their own only daughter, Ariadne, well, the person who had to pay for this, of course, was Deadalus. And so King Minos locked Deadalus up in a tower, a tall tower, surrounded it with guards. And with him, he locked up Daedalus' son, Icarus. Now, the two of them felt that surely the king would come to his senses, that he would release them after a time. But he didn't. They were in that tower for weeks. Now, food and water was brought to them on a daily basis, and Queen Pasiphae, who had sort of a soft spot in her heart for Deadalus because he was a wonderful fashion designer for her. Well, she sent him candles and books so that they could read at night. One day, Deadalus was standing near the window of the tower, the one window, and he saw birds flying nearby, large birds with huge wings, and he got an idea. He put little bits of food on the ledge of the window, and when the birds landed to nibble at the food, he would pluck feathers from their wings, just a few at a time. And after a few weeks had gone by, he had enough feathers that he could begin to fashion wings for himself and his son Icarus. He used the melted wax from the candles to hold the feathers together. And then the perfect day came. It was a sunny day. It was bright, and there was a gentle breeze outside. So Deadalus and Icarus strapped on their wings, and they went to the window to get ready. Now, if Deadalus had had any common sense, he would have said to his son, "You go first. I will be right behind you. I will direct you the way to go." But that wasn't what happened. Deadalus said, "I'll go first. I know the best route to a place where we can be free." And so he flew out the window, and Icarus flew behind him. Now, they were flying across the island, and they soon were over the Aegean Sea that surrounded the island. And Icarus looked down, and he saw that beautiful sea below, and it looked cool and refreshing. So he dipped down into the water. Oh, it was chilly. It felt so good. He felt like a seagull. And then he looked up, he saw the sun, and he soared high into the sky, as close to the sun as he could get. It felt wonderful. And so there he was behind his father not even paying any attention. And he was soaring and dipping and swooping and diving and looping through the sky. And then that sun, the heat of the sun, began to melt the wax on his wings. And the wings were heavy because of the salt water. And the wings began to come apart. And the feathers fell from the boy's arms. And the boy began to fall to the water below. Now his father turned and saw that this was happening, but it was too late. And the boy fell into the Aegean Sea, and he drowned. Now Deadalus was heartbroken, but there was nothing he could do to save his son. He flew on, past the ocean and over dry land. He came to a place where he would be safe, and he landed, and he took off his wings and he hung them up, and he never flew again. Now Deadalus, being the polymath that he was, went on inventing and creating, and he became a good citizen in this new land where he lived. And over the years, people would come to him for advice. One day, a group of young people came and they asked him, what could they do? What would he advise them for them to be successful in life? And Deadalus told them two things. First of all, he said, never make the Olympian gods angry at you. The second thing he said, creativity is a gift. Common sense must be learned.
Gutter! It's a gutter! It's a gutter!